it broke some spells for me that I was under. And one of them was this idea of industry is safer than nature. I,
Oh, yeah.
right? I believed because it tells me this, that this is true.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we throw away all of the science. I'm saying we look at it differently.
You're listening to the Soul Touched by Dogs podcast, the show for dog lovers who see dogs not as toys or tools, but wise souls worth our respect and care. I'm Anke Herman, and I'm your host.
Hello and welcome, Dr. Alexia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
I'm super excited to have you too. And I think we are in for a treat today because I really love the topic. So, but before we get there, let people know where in this lovely world you're based. And as always, what's your business with dogs?
I am based in the northeast of England in the UK, and I have Mystic Dog Mama. I'm a holistic canine nutrition consultant. I also have the Mystic Dog Mama podcast and community, and my focus is all on nourishing our dogs and ourselves, mind, body, and soul.
I love that. I love that you take nourish and go beyond, how you say it, like go beyond what's in the bowl. Like I just totally love that. So how did that all get started? Like what made you get into this work?
Well, it's actually a bit of a mystical experience. I had my background is actually in participatory art and design, and I was using those practices to do climate change research and look at how we engage people with these big, complex problems and make them relevant in our lives. And I had just finished a postdoctoral fellowship following on from my PhD in that, and kind of hit this moment where I was like, this isn't the direction that I want to go. And I'd had many moments like that in my life, these sort of what I refer to as dark night of the soul. You hit these crossroad moments, and it's like, but where do I want to go? And I did not have a dog. I'd always said I had dogs when I was a child, but as an adult, I've been so nomadic, like moving country to country, that it's never in my mind, it was never something that I could do. And I'd always said, one day when I'm settled, one day when I'm settled. And I feel like this kind of moment, which sort of culminated with me standing on a street corner in Glasgow, Scotland, with the pouring rain. And if anyone's experienced Glaswegian rain, it is dramatic, it soaks you, it just it's horrific. And I had one of these moments of literally like out of a film, standing on the street corner, getting soaked, and just said, all right, universe, I give up. What do you want? And I think from that moment of surrender, the doors started opening to this new path. And I went to go and visit some friends and family in Mexico in December of 2019 with the intention of taking a little bit of break, maybe going on a kind of pilgrimage for myself. And I went to see a local curandero there. And for people who are not familiar with curanderos, they are the local healers, the traditional healers in Mexico. And people still go to them like you would your GP. They actually deal with the whole self. So they're looking at physical stuff, emotional self, your soul self. And I walked in thinking I just needed my chakras unblocking or some sort of energy work. And he said to me, you don't need your chakras unblocking. You're a bruja, a witch, or an energy worker. And your problem is that you haven't been working with your energy properly. So you need to learn how to do that. And I ended up apprenticing with him in this. And he said, and I want you to pay attention to dogs and cats that cross your path, particularly now, because they're healers for you. And 2 days later, I got a knock on the door asking if I could take this beautiful little 12-week-old puppy named Lucky. He was named Lucky by somebody who doesn't speak English. It was like all of these things kind of came together. And my vision at the time was, oh my gosh, a puppy, like rainbows, unicorns, all the wonderful stuff. And it was that. And to get to your question of how I specifically got into this work, Lucky presented with a lot of health challenges and behavioral challenges because he was a pandemic pup. So I was in this village in Mexico with no support, having to figure this out by myself. I ended up repurposing my research skills from being a researcher, PhD researcher, into how do I help him? How do I feed my dog? How do I deal with these health challenges? And my vet who was there, she was brilliant. And she said, we're not really trained in nutrition and you're going to have to learn how to make his food, but I don't know how to help you. So that's where I actually retrained professionally in canine nutrition with zero intention of doing it as a job. I just wanted to help my dog. And that was the route that I needed to go down in order to understand what was going on. And I turned his health around, and people started saying to me, how did you do it? How did you do it? And so that's where I started the practice of nutrition consultation. But I always talk about it wasn't just the diet, that was a major part of it. But it was that sense of looking at my own stuff and looking at Lucky's stuff and what he was bringing up in me. And it was as much about creating opportunities for us to bond and to have a quality of life as it was about thinking about what goes in the bowl. And I think particularly when people end up in this situation via something like illness, there's this tendency to obsess over the bowl and obsess over macros and micros and all, like, am I adding in all the right stuff? And I totally get that because I was in that space too. But I think through the process of doing this, I was taken on this journey that was so much more than what was going in the bowl. It's a vital component of it, but it was about looking at that sense of nourishment, not just for him, not making him an optimization project, but actually to look at our relationship together. And through this relationship, what was it inviting me into as the dog mama? And that's the mystical component of it, that he, for this, so it's very much based upon my experience of him walking me into a new version of myself. And as I started talking about this, and I created the podcast because I needed community. I was in the middle of nowhere. I needed community. And other dog mamas started to say, I feel like that too, or I think like that too. So it's creating that space where we, as I'm a firm believer that all healing happens in community. And so that's what I'm doing with dogs and for the lovely people who take care of them.
Oh God, I love this so much. And it is so true because it usually starts with our own dogs, like you're mine, right? And there's number one, and it was the same kind of thing. Like there was this issue. I had no idea. The advice I got often didn't make sense. When people like, I don't know, like there's so many stories, but little Leo, like he had massive separation anxiety, and I mean, now looking back, I'm like, yeah, I can't blame you, mate. Like I just picked him up from the street. Somebody abandoned him. He was alone in the street, so that he would freak out, locked into a house. Like yeah, makes perfect sense. And the advice I got was always like, oh, you've just kind of got to tell him who's boss kind of thing, right? So there was a lot of that, and nutrition wise, a lot of, oh, the vet would say, you don't feed him the cheap kibble from the supermarket, and don't ever make food for him. Just buy the expensive kibble I sell you, right? So, what was the first kind of oh my God moment that you had when you started researching yourself?
Total overwhelm. And to kind of put it into context, he stopped eating. So I was desperate for getting him to just eat anything. And I was always aware, so before he got ill, I was always aware that it doesn't make sense to me that we say for ourselves it's not great to just eat ultra processed food. Yet that's what we're giving to our animals on a daily basis. So I started with just looking at what are good toppers to add in. So I was adding fresh toppers. And what happened was Lucky developed severe gastrointestinal issues and kidney issues. So I had both of those going on at the same time. And I noticed what he stopped eating any of the kibble and he was only eating the fresh toppers. So that was an indication to me, okay, I started paying attention to what is he showing me instead of what do I think should happen, but what is he actually showing me? And when I talked to my vet, that's where she said, you are going to have to learn how to, because I tried the prescription diets and he didn't, and I just knew that this wasn't the right way to go, but he wouldn't even eat them. So she was very open to, we just have to get him to eat. So when I started researching what to actually feed, particularly with these two issues in mind, it was like, your dog's going to die. You have to do the prescription stuff. You have to do this. You have to do that. It was so overwhelming. I didn't know where to start. And it was actually through Dr. Judy Morgan talked about Chinese medicine approaches to food therapy for kidney stuff and what types of fresh food you could be offering. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I hadn't been exposed to traditional Chinese medicine previously. I just started looking into this and I started trying some of the things with him because I felt like I understand the fear of people not wanting to try to make their food. And I definitely advise, particularly if you've got a therapeutic situation, you do need to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. However, I also was put into this position of he just wasn't eating. So I had nothing to lose, right? I had to try something. So I started focusing on that and I saw some improvement with that. And then I felt like at the time, it's a little bit different now because this was like 2000 that I was doing this. I found it really, really difficult, particularly not being in either the US or the UK, because I think a lot of the information around nutrition is based around those cultures and what's available there. I didn't have access to those things. So I had to then filter the information through what could I actually get a hold of where I was in a village in Mexico. And I found it very difficult of understanding what actually does a dog need? What do we actually need to feed them? And that kind of that put me down the rabbit hole of really questioning a lot of what we assume is normal. I started looking at where the feeding guidelines come from, and I started questioning a lot of this stuff. And then with that knowledge base, started to then build diets for Lucky that were working for him, making sure I was giving him the foods that were going to give him the nutrients that he needed, but specifically for the issues that he was facing.
Mm. Yeah, I totally relate the overwhelm and so many where you think should be experts, right? Where there's like that's the thing that always is my kind of thing when somebody like a vet or somebody says, well, okay, this is how it is, and they're very prescriptive, right? They're very like, here's, and there's no questioning or there's no, and then you go like, well, you're the expert, but what you say makes no sense. So, and I think your research skills really were extremely helpful there to recognize an assumption for what it is to go deeper,
Completely,
right? Because it's so
completely.
easy to take at face value what some expert or what you read in a book or to think like to really go and question every single assumption is is
Definitely.
is critical. Yeah.
I,
So
I, I, well, I want to add to that as well that to kind of ease people's fear, there is no one right way to feed a dog.
yeah.
I was looking for the one right way. I'm also a Virgo. I like kind of like things in boxes, that's a bit of my personality as well. But I had this false assumption that there was one right thing, and I was looking for the right thing. And there isn't one right thing. It's important to recognize that every dog is an individual, just like we are all individuals. There's no one right diet for a human. So when you're looking at how we've come to understand the sort of generalities of what a dog needs, you work within that for your dog. And I say that to alleviate some of the fear that people have around trying to hit all the numbers and trying to do everything perfectly. And what works for one dog is not going to work for another dog. So you have to kind of come into it where this is why I talk about nourishment. Nutrition is really an art and a science. It's not just a science. So embracing that kind of art perspective to it as well can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I totally love that. I always talk about, you have to learn all the things to draw your own conclusion and trust your own judgment. Like that's the objective, not somebody telling you what to do, right? So, and I think it's this shift. And I think I also understand it when people are more worried. I think people are more worried about experimenting for their dog than they are for themselves, right? So there's that
Completely.
sense of responsibility, and you don't want to get it wrong and do harm to your dog, where I'm thinking, okay, if I eat something that's not right, well, okay, I'm gonna have to live with it. But it feels like there's more at stake when
Completely.
it's your dog, right? So what do
100%.
you what do you recommend to somebody who goes, well, I know what we've got isn't right. I want to change, but I'm also a bit scared. So how do you usually ease people into that?
So normally if somebody is coming to me from that perspective, they're generally feeding something like kibble. So I would look at improving the kibble for one, like getting a better quality one, but do that by starting to add in fresh toppers. And one of the things that I say is kibble is well, I'll kind of back up. How we start to think about this is you have to ask the question, what is a dog? In order to understand what they need, what is a dog? A dog is a facultative carnivore. They are not omnivores. We talk about omnivores that, and I say that because that gets bandied around a lot where like, well, dogs can eat carbs. They have evolved to be able to tolerate carbs in a kind of starvation situation and being through evolving around us. But that's not their ideal diet. So carbohydrates make up approximately 60% of kibble because in order to keep that form, it has to have a lot of carbs. So when I'm looking at how do you want to improve things, I start adding in things that aren't in the kibble. So thinking about things like small oily fish, a really fantastic protein source, but also going to give your dog some really valuable omega-3s, which help with inflammation. They're just a fantastic addition to the diet. Adding in fresh meat. Add in some more protein, add in some eggs, add in some bone broth. My caveat with bone broth is don't use human bone broth that you get in the store because that's often made with onions and different spices that dogs can't tolerate. So if you're going to buy one, make sure it's a dog specific one because that will make sure it doesn't have any kind of onions. But you can also make your own bone broth. I have a recipe that I share in the link that I'll share with people that I make for Lucky. It's super easy to make at home, but that's a really great source of both functional hydration. It also helps with gut repair. And so it's an immune support as well. That's where I would start. Just some basic things like that. Some fresh dog safe veggies. I go lower on the fruit because that's high in sugar. I also try to avoid things like sweet potato because that's a sugary starch. So I would add in more proteins and things like bone broth as a way of kind of getting started. And if you're curious about actually making food, this is where I do help people in kind of putting the pieces together. And personally, I come from a perspective of ratio feeding, which is intentional feeding. People will often say, you might hear like balanced over time and like balanced and complete. Balanced and complete is a marketing term for one, but when I'm talking about balanced over time, it's not just random. It's intentionally feeding what a dog needs, meeting their nutrient requirements over a period of time. And usually that's over like a day or two or a week. So I look at basically, I feed Lucky in a very similar way to how I eat. And I actually shop for both of us. It's a kind of combined effort, which for me is also part of that nourishment. And there's thinking about the energy that's going into how we feed our dogs.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And because it makes such a difference. I mean, I've had neighbors laugh at me when I first, because Leo did not do, fortunately for me, the vet was like adamant, like, that's what you got to feed him. And I was lucky in the sense that Leo didn't do well on the stuff. Like really quickly, he farted like a truck driver. Like, he had skin issue, he'd be
Mhm.
scratching, and I kind of always had to encourage him to eat. Like he didn't
Mhm.
like it, so I kind of started fortunately very early to like, something isn't right here. And the first thing I found was this little ebook from some guy who'd lost his dog at 4 years old and goes, something is wrong here. And he dug into all the research. And the thing I remember, he says, well, lesson number one, read the damn labels, right? And because
Yeah.
when it says like, complete and balance on the pack with a beautiful dog on the front, no, that's not the interesting piece. Like, look at, and on the back, it says like 4% of chicken byproducts. Like,
Yeah.
you can, like, what's the other 96%, right? So
Definitely.
there's all, I mean, so I kind of, and the moment I started to feed him, um, more real food, he was gobbling it up. Gone were the days of no appetite, gone were the days of thoughts and whatever. Like, literally the dog changed overnight. And I've always felt that, you know, yes, it may be more expensive to feed him that way than kibble. But I always say like what I spend on food, I save on vet costs. And that's been true for my four dogs so
Absolutely.
far, and
Absolutely.
I think it's totally, totally worth it
It's
because
it's an investment.
Yeah.
It's an investment in their health and it's an investment in your relationship with them as well. And I think those are really important. And to your point about the label, absolutely. I think once you start to understand the kind of mechanics behind marketing and legally what companies can say, like what the term with or natural, those sorts of things, what that actually implies, that's one part of reading the label and
Yeah.
the kind of problematics of it. The other part of it, too, that I think is really important is to understand what bioavailability means. And
Mm.
bioavailability is how available is a nutrient to the body to absorb. Because it's one thing to introduce the body to something, it's another thing for the body to be able to make use of it. And so many of the added supplements, when you're reading a label, and it will tell you that that it has like vitamin E, vitamin A, whatever. The reason it's saying that is because they've had to add that back in due to the destruction of those nutrients through the cooking process of kibble. And what they do is they add in synthetic forms of the vitamins and minerals. That's not bad in and of itself. However, when they're saying, and this is where I talk to people who get really hung up on the kind of spreadsheet idea of the numbers all balancing. Just because a food says that it has a certain number of milligrams of zinc per serving does not mean that your dog's body is absorbing that much zinc. Zinc's a great example because they often use zinc oxide, which is a really cheap form of zinc. It's very, very bio unavailable. So your
Mm.
dog is pooing out most of it. And I think for me, when I started to understand that, it broke some spells for me that I was under. And one of them was this idea of industry is safer than nature. I,
Oh, yeah.
right? I believed because it tells me this, that this is true.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we throw away all of the science. I'm saying we look at it differently. When you then compare how a dog's body in this case, makes use of something like raw meaty bones, which if your dog can handle them, I say that is what you build a diet around. That's what carnivores in the wider ecosystem are designed to eat. That is the role they play. Break down the bones, and then through their feces, all of those minerals get put back into the soil. That's what they're designed to do. So their body knows how to get the appropriate nourishment out of that. And I think when I started to look at this, it helped me become less afraid. Going back to your question of how when
Yeah.
people are afraid, that started to make sense to me around how I started to think about rather from this kind of spreadsheet obsessed just because it says that I'm giving this many milligrams doesn't mean that that's actually true. And that started a way of really observing Lucky and partnering with him, where I started to, like I said, not make him I did at first make him an optimization project because I wanted to fix him because I was scared.
Yeah,
But
you're
it
scared of losing him, right? Mhm.
completely, but it evolved into actually watching the innate wisdom that his body has, watching what are the foods he's going for. I see this with kidney disease clients that I work with, where they're afraid because they've been told limit the protein or limit the organ meat. And again, we look at this on a case by case basis. But there was a dog that I was working with who was in stage 4 kidney disease that had been on a vegan diet. And then all of a sudden, they were open to introducing to me. And I was like, thank goodness, because that's what a dog is meant to eat. She went crazy for organ meat. Her body, that is a dog's multivitamin. That dog knew exactly what she needed. So then that becomes a process of maybe their body knows because they don't have the same hangups around food that we do,
So true.
you know?
So true. Yeah. Yeah. And trust that, right? It's like, I think it's just like with intuition, there's the two parts to it. One
Yeah.
is to perceive it, to recognize it, and the other part is to trust it. Like, and it's the same here, I think. It's like one part is to actually observe your dog and, and the other part is to then trust the wisdom in it. Well, are there things you know, that can help with the observation, or is it kind of as simple as, well, this offer different things and this is what they go for? Or are there other signals that they might be giving us about things they may not do well with or prefer that we tend to overlook?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think observing, again, not with this lens of there's a problem. I use a methodology in my practice called FETCH. It's an acronym that I created to help people based off of what I do as a canine nutrition consultant and what I see as the kind of pillars for optimal health for dogs. It starts with fresh food. So that is the foundation of everything. And what I mean by fresh is either raw or gently cooked. This is my first point of kind of questioning for dogs. Some dogs do better with gently cooked foods. Some dogs do better with raw foods. So offering a little bit of each and maybe looking at the season too. My dog Lucky tends to do better with gently cooked foods, but in the summer, he can tolerate a little bit more raw meat, for example. So I might adjust things seasonally. The second letter, E, stands for energetics. And this is where I'm informed by traditional Chinese medicine. And this has been a game changer for me, putting on my canine nutrition consultant lens, working with somebody who's tried everything, can't figure out what's going on. This might be the next layer of support that can help people. So I start to look at things like, is there a pattern in behavior that keeps happening around a particular time of day? Because from the kind of body clock perspective, Chinese medicine looks at energy is flowing through the body in a particular rhythm throughout the day, and it's often based upon what organ system kind of like wakes up at a particular time when it's needed to do its processes. So an example from one of my clients was she made an offhand comment to me that the dog was always restless around 11 o'clock at night. And I probed into this and kind of put some puzzle pieces together. And from a Chinese medicine perspective, it's the gallbladder and liver systems that kind of kick in around 11 o'clock. So putting this again into kind of a wider puzzle piece, looked at, I'm going to tweak the diet to offer some more liver support. And lo and behold, that behavior went away. So the trainer she was working with had been trying to train out the behavior, but there was an underlying issue going on physiologically that was leading to that. So if you start to see like zoomies at a particular time of day, or they're nibbling on a particular part of their body and at a particular time of day, those are things just to note. And then you can start to dive into this or talk to somebody like me who can help you put the puzzle pieces together and then make adjustments. The T in FETCH is for targeted. I see people throwing everything in the kitchen sink at a dog, like all of the latest superfoods, supplements. They've got a supplement graveyard and they don't know what's working. So strip everything back and try one thing at a time and track it. And when I'm saying track it, see if there is a sort of behavior that pops up or goes away at a particular time of day. Watch stool quality. The stools are a really good indicator of how things might be going on internally for your dog. The C is then curiosity. It's asking different questions. It's having a different lens. So for example, with the dog who was restless at 11 p.m., normally you wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't think, well, what's that got to do with nutrition? But it was because I started asking different questions. And I think this is from my art and design background, because we ask questions. That's what art does, and then put that into research. I asked some different things that might elicit some other information that helps me put the puzzle pieces together. But you can do that for your dog. Get curious. Did something start happening like after you went for a walk in a particular place? Or do you notice like after a stressful event, you start to see maybe the dog goes off their food, for example, or even looking at different times of the year. Do they do better on different things? You just sort of track this stuff and then you adjust things for your dog. H is for holistic health. And this is where everything kind of comes together. So that does look at things for everything from like, what floor cleaners are you using? What are you washing your dog's bedding in, for example? That might be triggering something. Did you walk where they've recently sprayed pesticides or herbicides, for example, being aware of that? But it's also looking at, and people can sometimes get uncomfortable with this part, it's looking at what's going on for you. If you're stressed, your dog picks up on that. If you're excited, your dog picks up on that. So it's not a blame game, but it's just understanding what are the different components that might be coming together that are having an impact on your dog so that you can then get to the root of things. So that's what I use. as a consultant. And that's what I teach people to use as well for their own dogs.
God, I love this so much because, and especially the example you gave where like, okay, the trainer works on a behavior, right? And I think it's such a tough job when you can't train, a health thing out of a dog, right? It's never going to work. So it's always going to be frustrating and you never, whatever you suppress over here comes out at some other, on some other end, right? So it doesn't, and I think I find it really like hopeful to see that there's more and more coming out that there is more to the dog and it's better to find the root underneath all of that than to and Annie Phoenix, right? Like she often talks about how often there's pain involved and there's trauma involved and like all of these things, and if you don't go there, and it could be nutritional things like if you don't go there, you can just hack at the leaves all you want, right? Until you actually get down to the root, nothing's going to change permanently, and it's going to be doing such a disservice to your dog, and it's going to be frustrating for everybody else, right? So I just love the holistic, like looking at the entire and all the different elements, right? And it's I mean, I don't know, like I find it's so easy when you pay attention. It's like what you can't unsee it. The relationship I had that with Mr. Super Sensitive here, when he was like pulling like a crazy, and I'm like, and I'd be like, for God's sake, I just want a peaceful walk. And then I'd be like, all right, how are you doing? I'm fine. And it was literally the moment I caught myself and, sat down for a bit and calmed myself, he would instantly relax with me. So it's like when you have a dog that's that sensitive, like it's so easy to see. It's kind of easier to overlook with a more resilient dog in that sense. So I think it's probably harder to catch on to, but I think having that, looking at all the different puzzle pieces, it's just wonderful. I love it. Love it.
It's what I found was most helpful in
Yeah.
terms of, and also I'm kind of rethinking this notion of one root cause of health. I do
Mm,
use that language because it's kind of how we speak, but I think it can be a little bit misleading that if I just get to that one thing and fix it, because it's the fixing
it's the
mindset that I
fixing.
think is problematic. I
Yeah.
think it's looking at, so to answer your question of like people tracking things, it's whatever you start to notice is your entry point into that.
Yeah.
You don't have to try to figure out the
Mm,
one thing that's the root. Trust that what's being shown to you is the entry point that you need at that time to start understanding your dog differently. And it will reveal other things to you. So in the case with the dog that was restless at 11 o'clock, it wasn't just a liver issue that was going on. There were a lot of other things that were going on, right? But that was an entryway to start to make some movement, to push the needle so that we could then start doing the other things. So I think trust what's coming up and don't feel worried that you've got to get to that one thing. What's showing up is your entry point into starting to understand what's going on in the ecosystem that you and your dog are.
yeah, I love that. I love, and it is that it's just the first thing, and then I mean, would you find? Um, I mean, it feels like it's almost inevitable that in that process of with the curiosity leading, that the bond actually strengthens massively because I'm just looking at it through like the whole process through the lens of the dog, right? So if you imagine, like you kind of don't feel well after eating, right? And so now they bring in a trainer to get when you double over after lunch, and now they bring in a trainer to teach you to stand upright, you know? How you feel misunderstood and almost like not seen and not ignored. And I'm thinking they must feel that, and if they
100%.
have a person who actually pays attention and brings curiosity and where the dog feels, oh, she's actually seeing me, like, and I don't know whether they have that much kind of conscious thinking
They
going
do.
on, but I think they do perceive that.
They do. I also practice animal communication, and all of us can do this.
Mm,
You're communicating with your dog all the time. So even if you just explain to them, so I started with some of this with Lucky where, because he also had separation anxiety, and I would start dictating to him, like just talking to him like I would a person, like I'm going to be going out to the shops. So I'm going to be leaving. I've got some treats here for you. I'm only going to be about an hour or, whatever. And then I'll come back and we'll do this. And I noticed when I started engaging with him in that way, it didn't it wasn't the first time that the separation anxiety disappeared. No, but I feel like he started to understand, and we're developing a language between one another so that I can just say to him, I'll see you in a little bit, and he's not panicking. If I don't say that, he does worry, is she ever coming back? They do understand us, and they are here. So to kind of go into some of the more mystical sides of things, they're here on their own spiritual journey, in my opinion. It's not just ours, but we come together. We come together to ultimately walk ourselves back to who we are, to our home. And I feel like when you have that kind of a perspective with your dog, in whatever way you choose to kind of approach that, but you end up developing such a deeper relationship with them that creates such a fulfilling relationship. And it also, the kind of byproduct of that is it makes things easier with one another. You're in partnership. Laura Donaldson talks about this a lot of being in partnership with your dog. I mean, and sometimes I'll say to Lucky, you're being a pretty crap partner right now. Can you work with, it goes both ways,
Yeah.
Sometimes, but he's an individual and he's got his own wants. And sometimes this morning he did not want to come back from the walk. And I was like, sorry, buddy, we've got an appointment. You got to come back. Here's the concession. I'll bring you out again later. It's not about having this perfect idea of what a relationship is with your dog. But when you have that sense that they are sentient, they are here on their own journeys. They have their own feelings. They are complex. Their complexity might look different from ours, but it's no less complex. And when we can honor that and honor our own experience with it and not go into that really common thing that I see of the dog mama guilt, right? When you recognize you're doing the best that you can at any given time. And I really believe from the kind of Toltec wisdom, Don Miguel Ruiz talks about the 4 agreements. And he says one of the agreements is always do your best, but understanding that your best is totally context dependent. Your best one day might be you got up and brushed your teeth. And it's having that sense of compassion for yourself as much as for your dog. And that's what's going to really create a wonderful relationship where you start to understand them. You start to spot changes within them. You start to see how they're evolving in their journey. And it just creates what I think is why we have dogs in the first place, is to have that kind of beautiful relationship together.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is that when there's that, because it builds trust, right? To that mutual respect, and that's what, that was literally the thing that made me start this podcast, because I kind of always, as I hate when I see people who use dogs as a tool. Oh, I need the dog to go hunting. I need the dog to guard the warehouse, right? And when they no longer serve, we just kind of get rid of them like an old shovel. And at the same time, sometimes they get the puppy as a toy for the kids, which I don't like either. Instead of using it to teach the child to respect the animal, they treat the dog as if it's like a toy. It's just more fun because it moves. And so if it gets too big, I've had a neighbor and they just get rid of the puppy too. So it's you miss out on so much. I mean, it's cruel to the dog, but there's also that bond that never gets built, that gets built only with that mutual respect. And I just love that trusted, connected relationship where where you don't need words, right? Where you kind of understand each other, and I just love it. And it's only possible with that kind of way of looking at it.
Totally. And I'm a big believer that we get the dogs that we need at the time, and that they kind of show up for us. And I think, again, going back to what the curandero had first said to me about dogs being healers, I think for me, I feel like my understanding of what healing actually is has evolved as a result of having Lucky. I used to think it was more about getting rid of, fixing, because that's a very Western allopathic perspective. But I've come to understand healing as this process of becoming, and evolution and integration. So that, of course, if Lucky's ill, of course I don't want him to be ill. That's still part of it. But I ask different questions too about, what is this showing me? What is the wisdom in this? I can't always ask that in the moment. So I'm not I'm not pretending like, and I'm not perfect at this, but I do ask, what is this showing me? And what is this showing me about myself? Because I think the other thing that I've learned about being with dogs is that they are gateways to our own spiritual evolution. And when we can apply curiosity to that, and we can see that they put us in circumstances that we wouldn't be in otherwise. I know for me, like having he was very reactive, especially being a pandemic pup. And we went through a really hard lockdown in Mexico. He wasn't exposed to anything as from 12 to that period of 12 to 16 weeks. It was just me. So we went out and it was like new surfaces were a problem. He got attacked by a dog. He was terrified of people. It was like everything, the perfect storm. And I used to dread taking him for a walk because it was so stressful. And then I started to look at as well, because I'm a Reiki practitioner. And two of the core 5 precepts in Reiki that we are meant to follow each day were such guides for me in working through what I was experiencing with Lucky. One was, just for today, I will not worry. And just for today, I will not be in fear. And I held on to them as I would go out on the walk, and I would look at when I was triggered by something. And I'd try to go back to that, and I'd look at, what is this showing me? What is the wisdom in this? Again, not in the moment. I'd often be, screaming my head off, get your dog, whatever. But that's the human experience. But then stepping back and asking, what is this showing me? And the reality is, it's nothing about the dog. It was about my own childhood stuff, or, all of those things that we don't necessarily get to process. And having a dog, the particular dog that comes to you, is such a beautiful gift for you to start to actually work through some of that stuff if you feel ready to, and if you're open to it through that lens of curiosity. So that's the other side of having a dog that I think doesn't get talked about as much, is those opportunities for us to evolve and become better versions of ourselves, which then is that ripple that we then bring into the world.
I couldn't agree more. I always say, like, if I look at what mine kind of taught me, if I had to sum it up, it's assertiveness. It's like it's the one thing that always felt natural. I was like you, the first one got bitten by a dog when he was 11 months old, and other dogs were never quite the same after that. And I'd be like a pit bull. Like I'd be like, there's this T-shirt that I like saw pictures of where it says, you attack me, you come for me, I'll fight. You hurt my dog, they'll never find your body. And I was like, I need that T-shirt. That's me, right? I will stand up for my dog, right? Way more than and it's literally something that has, yeah, okay, if it works for the dog, I can do it for myself too, right? But it's that it would have never happened without that dog, right? So I totally agree. And I've had the experience that, that it's not just it sounds interesting, and like I've lived it too. So it's yeah, I love that. I love that. So where can people, get in touch with you, find out about, I mean, obviously the podcast, if you want to mention it again, it's easy to find, but where can people find you?
Yeah, my kind of home on the internet is mysticdogmama.com, and that's mama spelled M-A-M-A, so mysticdogmama.com. You can find out all about the various things that I'm doing, and also to the podcast, but you can just search the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It was an absolute delight. I have the sense that like, I need to have you back.
Yeah,
There's
that's
like so
lovely.
much that we could dive into. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And yeah, anytime, anytime.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review so other dog lovers can find the show. Head over to soultouchedbydogs.com and sign up for the weekly treat. Tips, recommendations, and personal stories to warm your dog-loving heart. And if you know a awesome human you think I should interview, I'd love an introduction. Email me at Anke, that's ANKE, at soultouchedbydogs.com.